What's up everyone, Ventrua here with the Pathfinder Spark Aura Stacker video. This one is probably gonna be a bit longer, but there's a lot to explain about this build. So let's start with some disclosure. Number one, this build, while I rolled it when it was kinda cheap, now I wouldn't recommend playing it unless you have at least like 150 to 200 divines. Because tattoo prices went up, and tattoos are kind of mandatory to even start a build, plus you really want ashes. So there's a lot that goes to this build that went up in price just because Spark, like a lot of different versions of Spark and Pathfinder have been popular. It has been the strongest build I've played so far. It's level 99 for me right now, and I mean, I've done some Uber Mavens on it. I've done an Uber Eater. I've done a lot of Guardian farming and stuff, so build is definitely worth the price. For a non-mage blood build is definitely insane, but it is pretty hard to pull it up on a budget now, and I would not recommend unless you actually can afford most of the items on this build. The build was made by Rutu, and I've just adjusted it a bit to hardcore, but otherwise it's pretty much his version. So shout out to Rutu for making this build, and you guys should check him out if you haven't yet. He has like a budget version with yoke and whatnot, but again, while it is a budget version, the problem is that the tattoos went up, and you probably shouldn't invest that much into that build unless you can afford the whole build. That said, let's get into the build, and let's just go item by item, I think, because there is a lot to explain on every single piece. So first off, this build has 90 altars, as you can see. It has full suppression cap, obviously. It has my version is 20k evasion from Grace. You're probably never dying to early damage because you're also running Ruby Topaz Taste of Hate. The only problems you could ever die to is Fizz and Chaos, but we tried to mitigate that in our version of the build by actually getting Fizz conversion, so I will talk about that more later. And I think I will actually start with gems because those are easy to explain. So we have a Spark. We have our Spark setup in our gloves. I will show the gloves later, but let it be known it's the classic Spark gloves. You don't need Valve Spark. I just hit 21 Valve Spark. You should just use 2120 if you have that, or 2123 or whatever you need to get an extra projectile from your ashes. You do want to use Divergent though, because it gives you extra projectiles. It's a lot stronger than Superior Spark, so try to get a 21 Divergent Spark. If you cannot, 2020 will do. Trinity, best support possible. Inspiration, we have to use Anomalous for... Well, actually we don't have to use Anomalous, but Anomalous is better. We don't need the extra mana cost from Divergent, so we just use Anomalous for extra crit because default doesn't do anything. And then Spell Echo, if you can afford Awaken Spell Echo, it's probably the single biggest upgrade you can do for this build, because it gives chance for double damage, which not only it gives us a lot more damage than a normal Spell Echo does, but it also gives us more freezes for Heat Shiver, which turns into more damage and bigger shock. So, especially if you don't have any other source of double damage, I would highly recommend investing into Awaken Spell Echo. That would probably be the next update I do into it myself. Then we have the aura setup. So our auras are in our body armor in a 6-link, and here comes the extra part of the cost, right? We need Enlighten 4, pretty much non-negotiable. Ideally, you would even get Enlighten 5, but that's obviously unrealistic for most people. But we need Enlighten 4, we need Purity of Ice level 21, most likely. There's some setups where you can use level 20, but you should just go for 21 to make it easier. And then out qualities, especially on Blood and Sand. On the other auras, it doesn't matter as much, but it's a little bit extra. For bossing, you can drop Grace for Zealotry just to get 35% more damage, but I would highly recommend mapping on Grace. Actually, if you don't have a White Socket and you don't have Hatred Watcher's Eye, you can drop Grace for Hatred because they are the same color, so it's easier. Divine Blessing setup with Haste. Nothing special, it's not too hard to cast. It costs like 12 mana or something, so not too bad. We run shield charge, faster attacks. If you are running dual wield, you have to use sleep slam here. Smite linked to faster attacks doesn't even feel bad. We have decent amount of attack speed, and we run RF, which we can sustain due to 90 auras and regen honor flask. Steel skin, not only to remove bleed, but also to it's the best guard skill we can do. So I highly recommend Steel Skin over Immortal Call. I saw some people use Immortal Call, but Steel Skin's better. Arrogance Precision, I highly recommend maxing it. It's both extra crit and it's accuracy for a normal smite. Val Smite doesn't need it, but it's accuracy for normal smite, so... And it doesn't cost us that much life, especially if you use out qualities, so... As you can see, it reserves around 200 life. Not big deal. And then Sniper Smart Flame, Dish Inspiration, this is self-explanatory, right? Time to look at the items, and here you really don't have much options how to move stuff, so I will mention where you can and where you don't try to do too much like cute stuff. The build is pretty tight in how it works, and just keep that in mind before you try to do changes that you cannot really do. So your weapon is pretty much always going to be Nebulous in the setup. My Nebulous is not amazing, but I mean, it will do. You can, if you are an SC trait especially, the implicits you should aim for are chance for double damage, but that one is probably too expensive and you don't need it if you have Awakened Spell Echo, crit chance, or crit multi. Obviously, like lightning damage, cold damage work too, elemental damage, but those would be the implicits you aim for. Then you can use your second Nebulous to get like 60% more damage, or you can use a Dawnbreaker, which is what I do in hardcore to get some conversion and some fist mitigation, because fist mitigation is like one of the biggest problems of this build. And as you can see, Dawnbreaker is about 50% more fist max hit. So the only thing you need to know about Dawnbreaker is that it has a life mod, which is a problem because we use Utula's Hunger. So you always have to Val it or double corrupt it to get rid of the max life implicit. And if you manage to do that, then you can use Dawnbreaker. I highly recommend using Dawnbreaker, at least for mapping, because it gives you shield charge, which is just feels better than Leap Slam, so I don't know. I would use Dawnbreaker for mapping, Nebulous for bossing, even in SC. Further, we use Heat Shiver. Spark enchant is not necessary, but I mean, it's by far the best. But it's definitely not necessary. I played without it and it felt fine. Heat Shiver, this POB doesn't even have Frozen ticked, and it's still 23% more damage. If you tick Frozen, it obviously becomes, you know, a lot more. But in general, Heat Shiver is gonna be insane while mapping and pretty decent while bossing. The only problem for me, personally, is that I don't have anointed this thing, Winter's Embrace, because I don't have a +1 chest corrupted, so my freezes on bosses are definitely not consistent enough. But it still does more damage than any other helmet would do, and for like mapping and guardian farming and whatnot, it's really good. For the last chest, here, you ideally, the mod you look for the most, and it's like the only important mod really, is plus level to also get the gems, because that works on your Enlighten, and it frees up your Anoint, as I just talked about for your Heat Shiver. So, and you only need +1 because your Purity is 21, and then your Ashes makes it 22, and this would make it 23, right? Which gives you an extra gem level. If you don't have any corruption, you might need to get an extra tattoo for extra cold dress, or like you just need to click a text node and tattoo it, or you can take an Aura Mastery for +1 to all maximum res if you have reserved life and mana. You would probably be replacing this one, the 8% increased damage, which doesn't do that much if you use double Nebulous anyways, but for single Nebulous setup, it's really good. So Utala's Hunger is basically what this build is built around. We use a lot of uniques that don't have life, so it works perfectly for our build. And basically this chest is like the core of the build. If you can get +1 all on it, it's insane. If you cannot, it's still decent. Try to get at least +2 Aura or AoE if you cannot get +1 all, but it's playable even without the corruption. I will come back to gloves later, probably at the end. It's Spark gloves. I will explain the options how to craft them in a bit. So we will come back here. Boots, you want either Fractured Chaos Threads or Fractured Spell Suppression, and then you spam Strength Essence until you hit the other mod. And then you do suffixes can be changed either with Valbrist Maiden or on the bench, and you Weld Chaos until you get Avoid Chill, and then you craft Avoid Frozen. You can settle for a different move speed craft, but we don't have other sources of chill immunities, so I would highly recommend going for Avoid Chill if you can afford it. When it comes to enchants, flat damage actually was better than pen for me. There's also move speed, there's Avoid Stun, which is really good for mapping, because it's 80% and we already have some on the skill tree, so we are basically stun immune if we have killed recently. So you could go for that one if you plan to do a lot of mapping or simulacrum and whatnot, so it's also an option. Amulet, Ashes, in my opinion, not negotiable. Anoint Sovereignty, as I said, if I had +1 chest, I would change this to the Heat Shiver Anoint. Double Call of the Brotherhood, 20 quality, it doesn't show in PoB, but it's 20% elemental quality. Converting most of her damage to cold. Belt, here the stats you're looking for are Strength, Chaos Stress, and Flask Effect. Pretty much, ideally you would have open suffix to be able to grab Fire and Lightning Rest, but I would just suggest spamming Strength Essence until you hit a decent belt. You might have to settle on a belt without Flask Effect if you don't have a Fracture, because it's pretty hard to roll. I got lucky and bought this one cheap. You might be able to buy some cheaper belts because people see like, oh, belt doesn't have life, so it's worthless. But it is difficult to actually like intentionally craft. So this is probably the hardest piece to craft, or at least the most annoying. Like gloves might be more expensive, but they are way more deterministic. You wanna use Corrupting Blood Jewel in your Stygian Vice. I found one with Chaos Rest, Fire and Lightning Rest. I would probably recommend getting Fire and Lightning Rest because, as you can see, the Lightning Rest is like very barely overcapped for me, so getting Lightning Rest on Jewel is good. And Chaos Rest is just a little extra. You definitely want to have a CB Jewel on this build just because you don't really have a good way of removing it otherwise. Flask setup is just Diamond Flask for crit with resist suffix. We need this because without the resist suffix we are not rare capped, so even with Ruby Topaz Sapphire Flask. So the one thing you can do though for mapping is replace the Diamond Flask with a Quicksilver Flask and just have a Quicksilver Flask of resistance if you want to map faster. You shouldn't need this damage for mapping. So I've been trying to do that sometimes, so I highly recommend doing that. Ruby Topaz, increased effect, and then regen and reduce mana cost. Nothing more to say there, just make sure that in PoB the PoB says Flask uptime 100%. Taste of Hate, the stat we care about is fist damage taken from hits taken as cold. And Silver Flask, you can go for different suffixes here. You can go for stun avoidance, you can go for shock avoidance, or reduce effect of shock, I mean. Or you can go for cast speed, depending on which one you prefer. I went for shock effect because I mean, I'm in hardcore and I'm too scared of playing without shock reduction. Your Silver Flask is probably not going to be 100% uptime in PoB, but it's going to be 100% uptime while doing most content in this game. The one thing I want to talk about is you can use either reuse at full flask charges or reuse at the end of flask effect. I ended up going for reuse at the end of flask effect. You just have to press them at the start of every map. The reason I did this is because reuse at full charges would be really annoying in Sanctum and really annoying in Delve, which I thought I was gonna do on this build, but I didn't really end up doing those. So for mapping, reuse at full charges is completely fine. Then you use Melting of the Flesh. Due to us using a lot of +1 cold rest tattoos and converting that rest to all rests. We will show that in a bit when going over tattoos. When it comes to cluster, there is 3 different clusters you can go for. So this is the one I hit. It has knockback, lightning damage, and crit chance on the Thunderstruck node. You really need Doriani's Lesson, and then you want one other node with it. This is the second best cluster with Snowstorm. It, as you can see, it has Snowstorm there and Doriani's Lesson there. and you pretty much never pick up the one in the back. And the best cluster possible is this one, but it is also insanely difficult to craft. Storm Raider gives you power charges and some decent damage increase, and then the Ryan is less than that. So if you are looking for a better cluster, I would go for that. But I'm using this one, and it's more than good enough. Watcher's Eye, I decided to go for one defensive, one offensive mod. I have Fist Damage Taken as called from Purity of Ice and Base Crit from Hatred. I think crit chance Watcher's Eyes are really good. Both Wrath and Zealotry are good. Base Crit Hatred is good. The Purity of Ice mod is pretty good defensively. Life gain on hit from Vitality is insane, but you would have to fit in Vitality. You would probably replace this Inspiration. But it would actually make the build feel a lot better if you can get that. Brutal Restraint in Supreme Ego spot, all you kind of care about is Aura effect, but you can also go for Dexterity to convert more Dex into Pro speed, or cast speed, or move speed. Just try to get decent notables for your build. It also adds a lot of Dex, so it allows us to convert more tattoos. I have one Aura effect, cast speed, and move speed, so nothing insane, but not bad either. Warrior's Tale in this slot to increase the effect of master status. We have 3 in range of that, and then we have some approach speed there, 1 reservation tattoo. I think that's the only reservation tattoo I have in the current setup. You try to aim to have anywhere between like 30 and like 45 to 50 mana. Anything below that is a little too sketchy to be able to permacast, and anything above that is just unnecessary, so try to keep this number around like 30 to 40. And after that, don't really go for more reservation efficiency unless it allows you to fit something else. And then we have Unnatural in Shadow area, which also gives us +3 cold dress and 1 extra reservation efficiency there. Also always alive, accuracy crit, right? A little bit of recoup. Just a very solid Unnatural. In total, I think we have 8 tattoos of Makanga cold dress, which is honestly at this point a huge part of the cost. I think in hardcore these tattoos are like 4 diff each. In softcore they might be cheaper, but a lot of people starting to roll Pathfinders and other classes with like full melting setups, so these tattoos are probably just gonna keep climbing up, and the build is gonna get more and more expensive. But that is how we get most of our max stress on top of Purity of Ice, so keep that in mind. And now quickly go over the options how to craft these gloves. So there are 2 options how to craft these gloves. Number 1, which is the one I went for, is a 3 fossil combo of Etheric, Deft, and Glyphic fossil. If Glyphic fossils are available at a decent price, I think that's the best way to craft them. Alternative option is spamming a Horror Essence, and all you are aiming for with both options is hitting the 3.5% crit chance and hitting faster casting. And either, obviously you can hit the crit multi, but it's not guaranteed, but you are looking for those 2 and an open suffix. Then you do suffix is going to be changed, Reforge crit, that adds in the 3rd suffix. Hopefully it's a good draw on the crit multi. Sorry, Reforge caster, not crit. Because if you do crit, it could get attack crit multi, so you do Reforge caster. Then you do suffix is going to be changed again, Reforge speed, which adds the faster projectiles. And then I would recommend just crafting +1 projectile gems, but I ended up going for Ashling for +2. The base you use doesn't really matter too much. I ended up going for evasion base just because I had it available. I don't think you have to go for the spell damage base, but it's up to you if you want to. If you struggle with crafting gloves and you feel like my explanation wasn't good enough, you can try to Google like spicy sushi spark gloves or something, and he goes over the process in more detail if you are unsure on what to do. So, or you can just ask me while I'm streaming on Twitch.tv Ventrua every day. So just come and ask if you need any help, or if you have like a half crafted glove on how to finish it. And otherwise, I think that is gonna be it for the build. If you have any questions, just feel free to ask them below in the comments. I know the build is pretty complicated, so just ask if there's anything you didn't understand, anything I missed. And otherwise, see you next time. Bye bye, everyone. Enjoy the highlights of Elder Slayers and Maven. Actually, Uber Maven. Bye bye.
My mana is gone.